Having completed the Great Northern, he then got into the steamship business in order to facilitate American exports to the Orient. As usual, he succeeded, increasing American exports to Japan sevenfold from 1896 to 1905. Now, you may remember Commodore Perry or something? No, I don't know what his name is. I think it was Perry, who took the gunboats into Japan. You know what year that was? 1848 or 1852, 1854, something like that. 50 years later, we're exporting so little to Japan that James J. Hill can just on personal initiative say, I think we should try to sell them more stuff. 700% increase in a 9-year period. After 50 years almost of trading with them, we were trading that little with them that he could just, like that, increase 700%. He continued to reduce his rail rates in order to make American exports profitable. So if he could cut his rail rates, more and more things would be profitably exported. But they couldn't export it at this rate on shipment. But the more he cuts them, the more stuff that can be exported, the bigger the economy it gets. If he can cut his costs in transportation, which he was constantly doing, wasn't he? Like I said, choosing the best route, the shortest distance between 2 points, unless other considerations would make other things more efficient. Skipping to the next page, the Interstate Commerce Commission soon created a bureaucratic monstrosity that attempted to micromanage all aspects of the railroad business, hampering its efficiency even further. This was a classic example of economist Ludwig von Mises' theory of government interventionism. One intervention, such as subsidies for railroads, leads to market distortions, which create problems for which the public demands solutions. In other words, government gets in there, people come into government and say, come on. Government responds with even more interventions, usually in the form of more regulations and business activities, which cause more problems, which lead to more interventions, and on and on. The result is free market capitalism is more and more heavily stifled by regulation. Now, when Ayn Rand said we are in a statist mentality society is a mentality of statism, and we live in a capitalist past, our capitalist free economy past and individual rights, clashes with that statist impulse. And she said it's not a stable mixture. She said it's got to go one way or the other. Now here's evidence. He's telling right here a good statement of why it is that it has to go one way or the other. And the fact is, it usually goes the wrong way, minus major changes like the Revolution, the Constitution, and stuff like that. Continuing. And on top of that, usually the free market, not government intervention, gets the blame. Thus, all of the railroad men of the late 19th century have gone down in history as robber barons, although this designation definitely does not apply to James J. Hill. It does apply to his subsidized competitors, who deserve all the condemnation that history has provided them. I don't necessarily agree, because look at what they created. They created all kinds of wealth. The fact that they got into the government because their competitors were in the government. I mean, James J. Hill's an outstanding person of great integrity, but you can't totally dismiss the productivity and accomplishments of all the people who got into the government and railroad business. You can't totally dismiss them. Also deserving of condemnation are the politicians who subsidized them, enabling their monopoly and corruption. Well, possibly the people most condemnable would be the Founding Fathers, who put that little clause in the Constitution, Congress has the right to regulate interstate commerce. Without that bit right there, I don't think we would have been stuck with any of the crap that we're worried about right now. So that's the end of what we'll be taking from How Capitalism Saved America. We will now return to empire builders, because we've got to get a bit of a story. Herbert Dow and the Liberation of the American Chemical Industry. So we're going to spend a while with Mr. Dow because it's just such a good book. So since I'm giving you excerpts from 2 chapters of his 7 chapters, I really have to admonish you to go and purchase the book. Chapter 4, page 87, Herbert Dow and the Liberation of the American Chemical Industry. Quote, I can find 100 men to tell me an idea won't work, Herbert Dow once said. What I want are men who will make it work. When Herbert Dow fought to liberate the American chemical industry from a European stranglehold, he needed men to make his ideas work because almost everyone else told him he would fail. But from 1900 to 1930, Dow more than any other American, helped oust the established Europeans from world leadership in basic chemicals, from bromine to chlorine, and in chemical products, from aspirin to magnesium metal. He was born in 1866, 1 year after the end of the Civil War. As an adult, Herbert Dow would secure 107 patents for his inventions, but he developed his persistence and drive as a boy. Goes over some stories from his boyhood and stuff. Dow's future as an inventive chemist was triggered during his senior year when he watched a drilling of an oil well outside of Cleveland. At the well site, he noticed that brine had come to the surface. The oozing brine was considered a nuisance by the oil men. We're actually going to be going over Rockefeller in detail later, and you're going to see how oil used to be considered a nuisance. One of the well drillers took some brine to Dow and asked him to taste it. "Bitter, isn't it?" the driller noted. "It certainly is," Dow added. "Now why would that brine be so bitter?" the driller asked. "I don't know," Dow said, "but I'd like to find out." He took a sample of the brine to his lab, tested it, and found lithium in the brine, which helped explain the bitterness, and also bromine. Bromine was used as a sedative and also in photography to develop film. So this isn't a nuisance, this is a resource. This put Dow to wondering if bromine could be extracted profitably from the abundant brine in the Cleveland area. Others had extracted salt, sodium chloride, from the brine. Maybe Dow could do the same thing with bromine and sell it commercially. The key to making bromine profitably was finding a way to separate it cheaply from brine. Now it goes into this. You should get the book and read it because it's pretty good, interesting. He creates this thing of blowing out, is what he calls it. In electrolysis, he used an electric current to help free bromine from the brine, so he had to use electricity. Electricity wasn't too cheap back then, so it's kind of an expensive process, but he was able to do it. With this process, he was actually more efficient at producing bromine, than even the Europeans. We skipped quite a bit here, so pardon if this is a little. We're just going to take this one paragraph here to catch us up on the context after several pages, and then we're going to skip a few more pages. For Dow Chemical to become a major corporation, it had to meet the European challenge. So it had come on the scene in America. His electrolysis was successful. He was selling brine, he was selling chlorine, he was doing good in America, in the American market. But he wants to go into Europe now. So for it to become a major corporation, he had to meet the European challenge. Germany in particular dominated world chemical markets in the 1800s. The Germans, and to a lesser extent the English, had experience and access to top-flight scientists and used them to monopolize world markets and control prices. So European governments are in the chemical business, and they are able to throw top scientists and stuff at it. They're able to throw all kinds of resources at the problem. Here comes Dow. He can't throw, he can't just select the best scientists out of the best universities and say you're working here. He can't do anything but what people will voluntarily do with and for him. So he's got to compete with a pretty formidable foe. The American chemical industry was almost non-existent in the 1800s. Whatever the Europeans charged, the Americans paid. So if we needed chemicals, we just paid it. Now it goes over the bleach war. We're going to skip the bleach war. It's very interesting. But he won the bleach war just barely. He came out at the end. The last sentence here. The British gave up trying to oust Dow from the chlorine business and kept the price steady at $1.25. The bromine war is the really fun one. No sooner had the bleach war ended than Dow stumbled into a bromine war with Germany. In other words, his major chemicals, now the bleach war was with Britain. In other words, his major chemicals, chlorine and bromine, were both under strong attack in the early 1900s. The Germans had been the dominant supplier of bromine since it was first mass-produced in the mid-1800s. The vast potash deposits in Stassfurt supplied bromine to the Germans as a byproduct. Only the U.S. emerged as a competitor to Germany in the bromine market, and then only as a minor player. Some small firms along the Ohio River sold bromine